The city was burning. Flames stretched toward the dark sky, smoke rising in thick clouds. Buildings that once stood tall were now reduced to rubble. Broken lights flickered weakly, struggling against the shadows. The streets were empty, except for a small figure standing in the middle of it all. A young alien boy, no older than 7, clutched his mother's hand. She lay motionless on the ground, her pale skin covered in dust. He shook her arm gently. "Mother, wake up." His voice was small, filled with fear. She didn't move. His heart pounded as he looked around. People passed by, their eyes cold, their faces emotionless. Some glanced at him, but none stopped. None cared. He swallowed his tears and cried louder. "Help. Please, someone help." No one listened. The city, his home, had become a graveyard of silence and indifference. The boy's name was Cale, and he was alone, a human in the shadows. In the distance, a man watched. He stood at the corner of a crumbling building, his sharp eyes scanning the scene. He was different from everyone else here. He was human. Ryan Carter had seen many things in his life: wars, disasters, suffering. But what he saw now made his stomach twist. A child, begging for help, while his own people ignored him. Ryan wasn't the type to walk away. He stepped forward, boots crunching against broken glass. His black jacket swayed as he moved toward the boy. Cale looked up, eyes wide with fear. He had never seen a human this close before. Ryan knelt beside the boy. "What's wrong?" His voice was calm, steady. Cale hesitated, then pointed at his mother. "She won't wake up. I don't know what to do." Ryan placed 2 fingers on the woman's neck, feeling for a pulse. It was faint, but it was there. "She's alive," Ryan said, "but she needs help." Cal's eyes filled with hope. "Can you save her?" Ryan looked around. The air smelled of smoke and metal. The city was unstable, and staying here wasn't an option. "We need to move," he said. "It's not safe here." Cale shook his head. "But no one else is helping. Why are you?" Ryan's expression hardened. "Because someone has to." The watchful eyes. Ryan lifted Cal's mother onto his back. She was light, too light for an adult. Malnourished, weak. He adjusted his grip and turned toward the alleyways. "Stay close to me," he told Cale. The boy obeyed, gripping Ryan's jacket tightly. They moved quickly, slipping between the ruins. The city groaned around them, as if it were alive and dying at the same time. Then, a sound. A low hum, mechanical and deep. Ryan stopped. His hand instinctively reached for his sidearm. From the shadows, a tall figure stepped forward. It was not human. It was a watcher. Its silver armor gleamed under the broken streetlights, red eyes glowing like burning coals. It stood still for a moment, then took a slow step forward. "Step away from the child," it said in a hollow, robotic voice. Ryan narrowed his eyes. "Not happening." The watcher tilted its head. "This is not your concern, human." Ryan's grip tightened on his gun. His instincts screamed danger. He had faced enemies before, but this one, something about it felt different. Cale trembled behind him. "That's one of them," he whispered. "The ones who came after us." Ryan didn't need more information. He took a step back, heart pounding. "Run," he said. Cal's eyes widened. "What?" Ryan shoved the boy forward. "Run." Cale didn't hesitate. He turned and bolted down the alley. The watcher moved. Fast. Ryan drew his weapon and fired. The blast hit the watcher's armor, but it didn't stop. The machine lunged, raising a weapon of its own. Ryan ducked, barely dodging the energy bolt that sizzled past his ear. He spun, grabbed a small device from his belt, and pressed the button. Boom! A bright shockwave burst from the device. The watcher's systems glitched, its red eyes flickering. Ryan didn't wait. He turned and ran, following Cale. The mission had changed. He wasn't just saving a mother and child anymore. Now he was being hunted. Ryan's breath was heavy as he sprinted through the alley, his grip tightening around Cal's small hand. The boy struggled to keep up, his legs weak from exhaustion, but fear drove him forward. Behind them, the Watcher was recovering, its systems rebooting, recalibrating. It wouldn't be long before it was on their trail again. Ryan's mind raced. He needed a way out, fast. But every turn led to more destruction. Buildings on the verge of collapse, streets swallowed by fire, and above them, the dark sky pulsed with an eerie red glow. He had seen war zones before, but this was different. This wasn't just a battle, it was extermination. Cal's breathing was ragged. Where are we going? Ryan didn't slow down. Somewhere safe. But nowhere is safe. The boy's voice trembled, and Ryan could hear the hopelessness creeping in. He understood. When a child watches their world crumble, hope dies fast. But Ryan wasn't going to let that happen. Not tonight. They reached the edge of the alley, and Ryan skidded to a halt. His eyes scanned the open street ahead. A wrecked transport ship lay half-buried in rubble, its metal frame twisted and burned. Beyond it, old storage facilities stood like silent ghosts, their doors rusted shut. They had two options. Option 1. Cut through the wreckage and risk open ground. If the Watcher had allies, they'd be exposed. Option 2. Try to break into one of the old buildings and find cover. It could be a dead end, or it could buy them time. Cal tugged at Ryan's sleeve. I hear something. Ryan listened. A distant hum. Not just one. Multiple. More Watchers. He clenched his jaw. No time left. He grabbed Cal's hand again and dashed toward the nearest building. Its entrance was sealed shut, the access panel flickering weakly. Ryan pulled out a small device from his belt, a compact hacking tool, old but reliable. He worked fast, fingers moving with practiced precision. The screen glowed red, then green. The door let out a hiss before sliding open just enough for them to squeeze through. Inside, darkness swallowed them whole. The air was stale, thick with dust. Old crates and rusted machinery filled the space. It must have been an old supply depot, abandoned long ago. Ryan closed the door behind them and exhaled. We should be safe here for a bit. Cal hesitated before speaking. Why are you helping me? Ryan met the boy's gaze. It wasn't the first time he'd been asked that. He had fought in wars, seen people turn their backs on those in need. But Ryan had made a choice long ago. Because I couldn't walk away. Cal looked down, his hands clenched into fists. The Watchers, they took my father. My mother tried to hide me, but they found us. His voice broke. I think they killed her. Ryan crouched in front of him. She's still alive. We're going to get her out of here. Cal's eyes shimmered with uncertainty. You promise? Ryan placed a firm hand on the boy's shoulder. I don't make promises I can't keep. Before Cal could respond, a loud thud echoed from outside. Ryan tensed. The Watchers were here. A red glow seeped through the cracks in the door. Shadows moved outside, their metallic footsteps growing closer. Ryan's pulse quickened. They weren't scanning. They were searching. Cal gripped Ryan's sleeve, eyes wide with fear. Ryan pulled his weapon free and pressed a finger to his lips. Stay quiet. The air grew thick with tension. Then, the door control beeped. They were trying to force their way in. Ryan's grip on his gun tightened. He needed a plan. Fast. The metal door groaned as the lock flickered under the pressure of the forced override. The Watchers were persistent. Ryan knew their tactics well. They didn't just break in. They analyzed, adapted, and dismantled obstacles with ruthless efficiency. If he and Cal didn't move now, they'd be cornered. Ryan scanned the dimly lit room. Old crates, rusted pipes, and long-dead machinery littered the space. There had to be another way out. He spotted a grated vent near the ceiling, barely wide enough for Cal. It was risky, but it was their best shot. Ryan crouched, gripping Cal's shoulders. Listen to me. You need to climb into that vent. Crawl through and don't stop until you see an opening. Kel's eyes darted to the red glow beneath the door. What about you? I'll be right behind you. It wasn't exactly true, but Cale didn't need to know that. Ryan hoisted the boy up, guiding him toward the vent. Cale hesitated, his small hands shaking as he gripped the metal frame. I'm scared, Cale whispered. I know. Ryan kept his voice steady. But fear keeps you sharp. Use it. Cale swallowed hard and pulled himself up. The moment he disappeared into the vent, Ryan turned back toward the door. The control panel blinked. 5 seconds until override. Ryan exhaled slowly. Then, with practiced ease, he pulled a small circular device from his belt. A pulse grenade. Non-lethal, but strong enough to overload nearby electronics for a few precious seconds. He pressed the activation switch and tossed it toward the door. 3 seconds. The red glow intensified. Shadows moved outside. 2 seconds. Ryan backed away, muscles coiled. 1. With a sharp beep, the grenade discharged. A burst of blue energy pulsed outward. Sparks flew from the control panel, and the door jammed halfway open, twitching as if caught in a glitch. A metallic voice crackled from the other side, distorted and confused. Ryan didn't wait to see what happened next. He bolted toward the far end of the room, eyes scanning for an exit. The vent was too small for him, and there were no visible doors. Think, Ryan. Think. Then he saw it. A maintenance hatch, partially hidden behind an overturned crate. He sprinted toward it, sliding into position just as the first watcher forced its way into the room. The machine was sleek, humanoid in shape, but eerily unnatural in movement. Its head swiveled sharply, scanning for threats. The red glow of its optics cut through the darkness. Ryan barely breathed. The watcher stepped forward, scanning the room. Its joints whirred softly. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Its head tilted, as if listening. Ryan's heart pounded. If it detected him now, he was done. The watcher turned. Its optics locked onto the vent. Ryan's stomach twisted. Cale. The machine moved toward the wall, reaching up. It had calculated the boy's escape route. Ryan couldn't let that happen. With a sharp inhale, he grabbed a nearby metal pipe and hurled it across the room. The impact sent a loud clang echoing through the space. The watcher snapped its head toward the noise, momentarily distracted. Ryan didn't hesitate. He lunged for the maintenance hatch, yanked it open, and dove in. The cold metal shaft swallowed him whole. His boots scraped against the walls as he slid downward at a dangerous speed. Wind rushed past his ears. He barely had time to register the drop before impact. He landed hard, rolling to absorb the fall. Dust clouded the air. The space around him was dark and quiet. Ryan groaned, pushing himself up. He had no idea where he was, but one thing was certain: he had to find Cale. Before the watchers did, Ryan forced himself to his feet, his body aching from the rough landing. The darkness around him was absolute, thick and suffocating. He reached for the small flashlight on his belt and flicked it on. The dim beam cut through the shadows, revealing corroded pipes, dust-covered consoles, and a grated walkway stretching ahead. He had fallen into what looked like an old underground facility, a forgotten part of the city. He exhaled sharply, refocusing. Cale. He needed to find him. The boy had gone through the vent, but where had it led? Ryan pressed his earpiece. Cale, can you hear me? Silence. His jaw tightened. He tried again. Cale, if you're out there, say something. A crackle. Then, faint breathing. Ryan? Relief flooded him. I'm here, kid. Where are you? I don't know. It's dark. I crawled for a long time, and then I fell into some kind of tunnel. A pause. There's water on the floor. Ryan's mind worked fast. The underground drainage system. It ran beneath the city, connecting abandoned sections to the outer districts. If Cale had dropped into it, he was alone in a maze. and he wasn't safe. Ryan moved, his boots clanking against the grated floor as he searched for an access point. Think. If the tunnels connected here, there had to be a maintenance hatch. He swept the light across the walls, searching. Then he spotted it. A rusted metal door, partially hidden behind collapsed debris. He hurried over, pushing aside broken beams. The door's locking mechanism was corroded, but still functional. He pulled his hacking tool free, pressed it against the panel, and waited. Seconds stretched. Then, click. The door slid open with a groan, revealing a tunnel sloping downward. The air was damp, filled with the faint stench of stagnant water. He stepped inside, flashlight in hand. "Cale, keep talking," he said, his voice echoing. "I hear something," Cale whispered. Ryan froze. What kind of something? A faint noise filtered through the earpiece. A rhythmic clanking, distant but growing louder. Ryan's stomach twisted. The watchers had followed him. "Cale, listen carefully," Ryan said, keeping his voice calm. "You need to move. Now. I don't know where to go. Find something. A ladder, a door, anything. Just keep moving, and I'll find you." Cale's breathing quickened, but Ryan could hear him shuffling forward. "I see. A tunnel ahead. There's a light. Good. That meant an exit. Run toward it. I'm coming." Ryan picked up his pace, jogging through the tunnel. Water sloshed beneath his boots, and the deeper he went, the more the air thickened with humidity. The tunnel walls were lined with old maintenance panels, most of them dead. Then, a sound. Not Cale. Something else. Ryan killed his flashlight and pressed himself against the wall. He listened. Footsteps. Mechanical. Precise. A watcher was nearby. His pulse quickened. The underground tunnels were tight spaces, not ideal for a fight. If he engaged now, he'd have no room to maneuver. He needed to outthink it. Slowly, he reached into his belt pouch and pulled out a small holo decoy. A simple device, but effective. He activated it, programmed it to generate a flickering heat signature, and tossed it down a side tunnel. A second later, the watcher's red scanning light flared to life. It turned sharply, following the decoy. A trap worked best when your enemy thought they were hunting you. Ryan didn't waste the opportunity. He pushed forward, running now, following Cale's signal. The tunnel sloped downward, and as he rounded a corner, he spotted a faint glow ahead. A door. Cale stood in front of it, frantically pulling at the rusted handle. "It won't open." Ryan reached him in seconds. He grabbed the handle and yanked hard. It refused to budge. Behind them, the watcher's footsteps returned. Closer. Ryan's mind raced. No time for subtlety. He grabbed his sidearm, switched it to charged pulse mode, and aimed at the door's control panel. Boom. The panel exploded in a shower of sparks. The door let out a long groan before it slid open just enough for them to squeeze through. "Go, go." Ryan shoved Cale inside before slipping in after him. He slammed the emergency lock, sealing them in. The room they had entered was massive, an old underground station, abandoned for years. Dust-covered platforms stretched into the darkness, and old mag rails stood motionless like relics of a forgotten era. Cale was shaking. "Is it gone?" Ryan exhaled, listening. Silence. The watcher wasn't breaching the door. Yet. But this wasn't over. Ryan turned to the boy, his expression firm. "We can't stay here. If the watchers found this place, it means they know where we are." Cale hesitated. "Where do we go now?" Ryan looked toward the far end of the station, where an old mag train sat on the tracks. It looked barely functional, its power core dim. But Ryan wasn't looking for a ride. He was looking for what was inside. He turned to Cale, determination in his voice. "We find a way to fight back." The station was eerily silent, except for the distant hum of decayed machinery. Dust swirled in the dim glow of emergency lights, their flickering barely illuminating the abandoned platforms. Ryan crouched near the rusted mag train, scanning the area. Cale clung to his side, his large, dark eyes filled with uncertainty. "Is it safe now?" the boy whispered. Ryan exhaled, listening. For now. The Watchers had stopped their pursuit, but that didn't mean they had given up. They were machines, relentless, calculating. If they had lost sight of their target, they would adjust their strategy. And that meant Ryan and Cale were running out of time. "We need to keep moving," Ryan murmured. He gestured to the mag train. "This thing's ancient, but if there's a working power source inside, we might be able to use it." Cale hesitated. "Use it how?" Ryan didn't answer right away. He approached the train's control panel, wiping away layers of dust. The cracked interface flickered weakly, its outdated system struggling to boot up. If there was even a spark of energy left in this thing, they could reroute it, maybe even send a signal, a distress beacon. If there were still rebels in the city's outer zones, they might pick it up. Ryan placed his palm on the cold metal. "Stay close, kid. Let's see if this rust bucket still has a heartbeat." Cale followed as Ryan climbed into the train's cockpit. The controls were ancient, designed for a time before AI dominance. Ryan's fingers hovered over the interface, searching for a manual override. He tapped a sequence, and the screen flickered brighter. A deep mechanical hum reverberated through the train's body. Cale jumped. "Is it working?" Ryan narrowed his eyes. "Maybe." Then, a sound. Not from the train. From the far end of the station. Ryan tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. Cale gripped his arm. What was that? Ryan listened. Footsteps. Not mechanical. Not Watchers. Something, or someone, was here. He pulled Cale behind a console and peeked out. In the dim light, shadows moved along the platform. At least 3 figures, humanoid in shape but wrong in the way they moved. Stiff, unnatural. Ryan's jaw tightened. Drones, but not just any drones. Patrol enforcers. Unlike the Watchers, these machines were designed to mimic human movements, infiltrate rebel zones, and hunt without mercy. And right now, they were searching for them. Ryan pulled Cale closer. "Listen to me." No sound. No movement. The boy nodded, his breath shallow. The drones fanned out, their metal exoskeletons blending into the shadows. Their heads turned in sharp, calculated angles, scanning for signs of life. They were tracking residual heat. Ryan's mind raced. The mag train was still generating warmth from its faint energy surge. That meant it was giving them away. He had 2 choices: shut it down and stay hidden, or turn it into a weapon. His fingers hovered over the control panel. Think fast. Then, Cale stiffened beside him, his eyes wide with fear. One of the drones had stopped just outside the cockpit door. It had sensed them. Ryan didn't hesitate. He grabbed a loose power coil from the console, yanked it free, and twisted the wires together. The interface sparked violently, sending a surge through the mag train's old systems. The entire train shuddered. The sudden burst of power was enough. The drone reacted instantly, its head snapping toward the flickering lights as its scanners recalibrated. Ryan seized the opportunity. He grabbed Cale and ran. They burst from the cockpit, sprinting toward the far end of the station. The drones whirred behind them, their metal limbs moving with inhuman speed. Ryan could hear their tracking signals locking on. A red targeting laser brushed past his shoulder. They wouldn't make it to cover in time. Ryan's instincts took over. He turned sharply, pulled Cale behind him, and fired. His pulse shot struck the nearest drone in the chest, sending it staggering backward. Sparks flew as its systems flickered, but the second drone was already leaping toward them. Ryan barely had time to react. He pushed Cale aside and threw himself into the attack, using his body weight to knock the machine off balance. They crashed onto the station floor, rolling dangerously close to the edge of the tracks. The drone twisted, its metal fingers latching onto Ryan's arm. It was strong, too strong. Ryan gritted his teeth as it squeezed, his bones threatening to snap. Then, Cale moved. The boy scrambled toward the broken mag train, his hand shaking as he reached for the control panel. His fingers hovered, then pressed a random sequence of buttons. The train roared to life. A blast of energy surged through the rail system, sending a shockwave across the platform. The force knocked the remaining drones off balance. The one pinning Ryan down jerked violently, its circuits frying from the energy surge. Ryan ripped free and rolled away as the machine collapsed. He turned toward Kel, who was staring at the train in shock. I didn't know it would do that," the boy stammered. Ryan coughed, forcing himself to his feet. "Yeah, well, good timing." The last standing drone recalibrated, its red scanner flickering dangerously. It raised its arm, preparing to fire. And then the mag train exploded. The energy surge had been too much for its decayed system. It detonated in a brilliant flash of light, consuming the entire platform in a firestorm of blue plasma. Ryan grabbed Cale and ran. They didn't stop, didn't look back. The heat seared behind them as they fled into the tunnels, their only hope now lying in the darkness ahead. Because if the drones were here, then the real hunters weren't far behind. The tunnel stretched endlessly before them, twisting in unpredictable patterns, their walls lined with old circuitry and forgotten conduits. The dim glow of failing emergency lights flickered, casting erratic shadows across the passageways. Ryan's breath was heavy, his body aching from the fight at the station. Cale clung to his side, struggling to keep up, but he refused to complain. The explosion had bought them time, but not enough. The Watchers would be recalibrating, and the surviving drones would continue their pursuit. Ryan slowed his pace, pressing Cale against the cold metal wall. "We need to find a way out of here." Cale looked up at him, his alien features pale under the dim lighting. "Where does this tunnel lead?" Ryan shook his head. "Not sure. But if we keep moving, we'll find something." He took a step forward, and then the tunnel shifted. A deep mechanical groan reverberated through the walls. The lights flickered hard, nearly going out. Dust rained from above. Ryan's instincts screamed at him, "Move! Now!" They sprinted forward just as the tunnel behind them collapsed. Metal beams and debris crashed down, sealing off the path they had just come from. A cloud of dust and smoke billowed toward them. Cale coughed. "What was that?" Ryan didn't answer. He pressed his palm against the tunnel wall, feeling the vibrations running through it. That wasn't just structural decay. Something had triggered it. And if something could control the tunnels. They weren't alone down here. A faint sound reached his ears, a whisper. Ryan's grip tightened on his weapon. He turned to Cale, pressing a finger to his lips. Silence. Cale nodded, his large eyes darting around. The whisper came again. Faint, fragmented, like echoes trapped in the metal walls. Ryan turned his head, trying to pinpoint the source. Then he saw it. A faint red light pulsing ahead, barely visible through the swirling dust. Not a drone. Not Watchers. Something worse. Ryan grabbed Cale and pulled him into a small crevice between the conduits. They pressed themselves into the shadows as the light grew brighter. A shape emerged from the darkness. It was tall, thin, unnatural, a figure wrapped in metallic fibers that pulsed like living veins. Its head was featureless except for a single glowing red lens, scanning the tunnel with slow, calculated movements. Its elongated fingers drifted along the walls as it walked, as if feeling the structure itself. Ryan barely breathed. A seeker. He had only ever heard rumors. Seekers weren't just machines. They were sentient hunters, more advanced than Watchers, more relentless than drones. They didn't just track their prey. They felt them. And it was here, searching. Cale trembled beside him, his small fingers digging into Ryan's sleeve. He didn't dare move. The seeker stopped. Its head tilted. It had sensed something. Ryan's heart pounded in his chest. His mind raced. If they stayed here, it would eventually detect them. But if they ran, it would definitely detect them. Then, Cale made the smallest of sounds, a tiny intake of breath. The seeker's head snapped toward them. Ryan acted on instinct. He grabbed a rusted metal pipe from the ground and hurled it across the tunnel. The impact echoed loudly in the opposite direction. The seeker moved. It turned instantly, gliding toward the sound, its movements eerily smooth. Ryan didn't wait. He seized Cal's hand and sprinted the other way. They ran hard, dodging debris, leaping over fallen wires. The tunnel around them grew narrower, colder. The red glow of the seeker flickered behind them, its presence relentless. Ryan spotted a door, old, rusted, barely hanging onto its hinges. But if they could get through it. Go! He pushed Cal forward. The boy squeezed through just as Ryan threw himself against the metal frame. He yanked the handle. Stuck. The seeker's glow intensified behind him. Ryan kicked the door with everything he had. The rust gave way, and he stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind him. Darkness. Heavy. Suffocating. Ryan felt along the walls. The air here was different. Thicker. Where are we? Kel whispered. Ryan wasn't sure. But as his eyes adjusted, he realized the walls were lined with something unexpected. Pods. Dozens of them. Inside each pod, a person. Ryan stepped closer, wiping away dust from one of the glass panels. A human face stared back at him. Eyes closed. Motionless. Cale gasped. Are they dead? Ryan checked the panel beside the pod. A weak pulse flickered on the screen. No, not dead. Asleep. Cryostasis. But why? A sound behind them. The seeker. It was outside the door. And this time, there was nowhere left to run. Ryan's breath came in ragged gasps as he pressed himself against the wall, gripping Cale tightly. The door behind them rattled. The seeker was here. It had tracked them through the tunnels, relentless, calculating. Now, there was no escape. The flickering red light seeped through the cracks in the door, illuminating the frozen faces inside the cryostasis pods. Ryan's mind raced. They were surrounded by people, humans, trapped in a state of deep sleep. Why? Who put them here? Cale tugged at his sleeve, whispering urgently. Ryan, what do we do? Ryan scanned the room for anything useful. The pods were wired into the walls, their interfaces blinking weakly, some barely operational. A terminal stood at the far end, covered in dust, its screen cracked but still faintly glowing. If he could access it. The door lurched. A terrible screech of bending metal echoed through the chamber. The seeker was forcing its way in. Ryan moved. He dashed toward the terminal, Kel right behind him. His fingers flew over the ancient keyboard, bypassing security locks with years of muscle memory from hacking old Earth tech. The screen flickered, lines of text scrolling rapidly. Project LUME Cryogenic Stasis Protocol. Human Preservation. Do not disturb. System incomplete. Ryan's eyes narrowed. Preservation. Who had put these people in stasis? And why did the system call it incomplete? The door snapped. A clawed, metallic hand forced its way through the crack, its fingers twitching as it searched for them. Cale whimpered, stepping back. It's coming. Ryan ignored the panic surging through him and scrolled further. Then he saw it. LUMEN FAIL SAFE AK Warning. All known ESSE and TIL systems will shoot down. Non-essential. That meant. The lights flickered harder. The air itself seemed to vibrate. The seeker froze, its red eye pulsing as if sensing the change. Ryan slammed his hand onto the activation key. Instantly, the room shuddered. The pods began to hum, their screens glowing brighter. A deep vibration resonated through the walls as hidden mechanisms activated for the first time in what could have been centuries. The Seeker jerked its head toward the cryopods, its red glow flickering erratically. Ryan grabbed Cal's wrist. "Stay behind me." The Seeker moved. It forced the door open, its metallic form gliding toward them with terrifying speed. Ryan had seconds. He reached into his vest, pulling out a shock charge. It wasn't designed to destroy machines like this, but if he could slow it down. The Seeker lunged. Ryan threw the charge directly into its chest. A burst of blue energy erupted, sending the creature staggering backward, its red light dimming for just a moment. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Because at that same instant, the cryopods released. With a hiss of escaping vapor, the glass casings slid open one by one. Pale, weak figures tumbled out, their bodies stiff from years, maybe centuries, of stasis. The first to move was a woman. Her eyes fluttered open, and she gasped, disoriented. Ryan grabbed her shoulders. "Can you stand?" She groaned, her muscles barely responding. But when she saw the Seeker recovering from the shock blast, her expression changed. Fear and recognition. "You woke us up," she rasped. Ryan nodded. "Do you know what's happening?" She coughed, trying to steady herself. Then her gaze hardened. "I know exactly what's happening." The Seeker shrieked. Its system had rebooted, its red eye blazing even brighter. It charged, its clawed arms slicing through the air. But before it could reach them, the woman lifted a hand, and the Seeker froze. Ryan's eyes widened. What the? The air around the woman rippled. A wave of energy pulsed from her palm, slamming into the Seeker. The creature's body convulsed, sparks bursting from its joints. It let out a distorted scream, then collapsed. Smoke curled from its broken form. The red light in its eye faded to black. Ryan turned to the woman, stunned. She looked at him, her breathing still weak. "You just reactivated Lumen." Ryan blinked. "Lumen? What does that mean?" She stared at the cryopods, where others were now stirring, waking from their frozen slumber. "It means," she said, "you didn't just save us. You just restarted a war."